Hello! Today I want to talk about something that affects huge numbers, well, about half the population, roughly. It's periods and menstruation. My name is Sarah Jane Critchley. I'm the author of A Different Joy, The Parent's Guide to Living Better with Autism, Dyslexia, ADHD and more. And half of the people on the planet will have these particular issues, not necessarily half of those with a diagnosis, but certainly far more than we ever identified in the past. So, given that increasing numbers of people who are female are being given a diagnosis, let's talk about why this is particularly difficult, especially for those who are autistic. Okay, let's get started. First of all, there's a really good piece of research that was done and published just by the lovely Robin Stewart, who's an autistic woman, and Laura Crane and a team at Cray in London, and they did a piece of research to examine why periods were so much more difficult for autistic people than they are for neurotypical people. And what they discovered was that autistic people had all the issues of pain and inconvenience that everyone else who menstruates has, but they also had increased amounts of reports of heavy bleeding and painful periods, really painful periods. They had increased self-injurious behaviour. So what that means is that if, as normally, that individual would be quite likely to pick or to cut themselves or to headbang or anything like that, they would be far more likely to do that during their period. Far more likely. And that seems perfectly sensible to me, because you're really uncomfortable and in pain, and if you can't express that emotion clearly and have people understand what's going on, then you're far more likely to express it physically in those sort of behaviours, aren't you? They also discovered that people had issues in regulating mood. Now, as somebody who has menstruated for an awful lot of my life, I will, like many ladies out there, identify that you can have a bit of a hormone roller coaster, can't you? Hormones go up and down like this, and that's really difficult to manage. Well, if you're autistic and you also suffer from finding it harder to manage those mood swings, to manage that variability, and you find that the change involved in that and the unpredictability involved in that is incredibly stressful, then it's not surprising that you have additional problems regulating that mood. Other things they found was that sensory sensitivities, which are a particular part of autism, very much a very common part of autism, were exacerbated, were bigger. So if you are sensitive to things touching you, when you have your period, you're far more likely to be sensitive to that. You're far more likely to be sensitive to sound and taste and touch, and all of those things can be much heightened. They also found that as a result, lots of people had far more repetitive behaviours. Now, those are less likely in females who are autistic than they are in males, but at this particular time of the month, they're far more likely to exhibit repetitive behaviours, and sometimes very severe premenstrual syndrome. Now, that's something that needs to be investigated by a doctor, and you need to get additional support if you're somebody who suffers from that, or you know somebody who does, and it's making it really difficult for them to manage and cope. So that's something that needs medical intervention in the same way that it would for anybody. And it's actually quite important to know what's normal for that individual, so you can identify where and when it goes wrong and get appropriate help for that. Now, there are lots of things that you can do that will make it easy. We have to be very specific. There's some really nice resources around there. When I was growing up, there were very few choices for people who had periods and how to deal with menstrual blood. Now you've got loads of choices, and it's becoming far more acceptable and far more part of conversation to talk about alternatives. There are some really nice alternatives around there. There's all sorts of special period pants. And I don't just mean the black ones that you wear because you don't want to make a mess in them, but please, if you find one that your young person likes, buy that pack over and over again, buy plenty of them, and be prepared to throw them away if they get messy. That's okay too. You can also make your own. You can buy pretty patterned ones that are reusable, that you just put in the wash, that can be softer. They can be made of a material that they like to have next to their skin, because for the sensory reasons we were talking about. Some people like to use sponges. That's a very natural way of actually managing a period. You can even find sites that will enable you to make your own from the materials that you like, that you feel safe and secure with. And as well as the normal tampons and towels, you can also have menstrual cups that actually just catch the blood and you can just flush it down the toilet. And it's a nice, easy way of dealing with that. But it requires a degree of dexterity that lots of our autistic people might not have. So not everybody will get on with everything. It's a matter of showing the options and giving them a choice. So, my 6 top tips for people who have periods. 1 is to be very clear about and explicit about the physical changes that will happen, and to be clear that those are a normal part of being a human person in a body that thinks that it's a woman. The second thing is to be prepared for the emotional and physical changes and sensory changes, and that these are a normal response to hormone changes, a normal response. To give the options for sanitary protection, we just talked through several of them, and to practice using them. It may take more than one go, it may take several goes. The other thing is to explain how periods change throughout the month. So from what might be a very light flow to start to an absolute flood to some spotting, and to know that spotting is normal. And that what happens to one person may not happen to another. The range of normal is quite varied. And that also your periods will change over a lifetime. So periods when you first start having them can be quite different to periods when you've had a child already, and in that post-birth period it's very, very different. And then of course you go into menopause when the periods will stop altogether, and that's a different part of a woman's life, a different part of someone who menstruates life. It's when menstruation stops, normally in your 40s to 50s anyway. And to be aware that not everybody who has periods will identify as female. We have quite a large proportion of people who are autistic who identify as non-binary. That's not either male or female, or who can't kind of work out what their body is. It doesn't identify, it doesn't feel particularly female, it doesn't feel particularly male. It can be anything in between. And that's also fine too. But when somebody who doesn't identify as female, who doesn't feel comfortable in all the female bits that go, who feels uncomfortable with breasts and bleeding and all that stuff, is going to find it particularly difficult if all of a sudden they start to bleed. And so you might find that someone might bind their chest to try and squash their breasts, and you might find that they really, really struggle at that time of the month. So specific help for them would be great. And just to say that it is a cycle, most people's are 28 days, not everybody's. There's a huge variability. And there are some really nice apps you can use to record what is normal for that young person. And then you can begin to start to understand how that process is working. Hopefully that'll help you. By all means, go onto the website and have a look at some of my other resources that are out there. I've got a website. You can send me an email to sarahjane@differentjoy.com, Facebook, Twitter and Pinterest. And please, 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 if you're catching this on YouTube, ring the bell, give me a thumbs up and let me know if you liked it. Share it as widely as you can. We want to help people out there. Take care. Lots of love to everyone. Goodbye now.